Hey, 50-50 on busted pistons. Man, I guess I'm a little harder on stuff than I want to admit sometimes. Alright, so I'm back working on the Ford. And like you saw in the last video, this thing broke some pistons, and I haven't torn the motor down any more than I did at that point. I just had the driver's head off. And I posted that video, and a ton of people reached out to me. There was a lot of you guys that are like, hey man, I'm running way more boost than that on a stock bottom end. I'm running 12 pounds, or I'm running 8 pounds. Which had me thinking, maybe these things aren't as bad as I thought they were. You know, maybe I did something wrong. So I went through the data logs. I went through every single data log that I have on this thing, and everything looks perfect. The air fuel's nice and rich, the timing nice and conservative. There was two things that I kind of noticed, and one was that it hit 13 pounds. I have one data log of it where it hit 13. I don't know what happened. I think it was a wastegate issue. Did that cause it? I don't know. That happened, it was pretty far back in the data logs. I don't know, maybe that weakened it. Something I'm going to need to figure out to make sure that wastegate doesn't stick on me. And the second thing was, this thing always spooled really slow. And I could see it in the data logs. I'd go wide open and it would sit right at no boost, no vacuum, just atmospheric pressure for like 3 to 4 seconds. And I had a lot of timing in it at that point. Not a lot. I had 17, 18-ish degrees at that point, and I think it could have been that much load right there. What I don't understand is why it was taking so long to spool at that point, because once it started to build boost, it was really quick. It just seemed to really struggle to get boost at that point. So I mean, that normally would be like kind of a transition period. It wouldn't really ever sit there. It would go through that on its way to boost. So I thought the timing was okay, but maybe just sitting there under that super high load with that much timing was too much. I don't know. I might, like, I don't know. Maybe when I get into it, I'll find something else that was wrong. But that's kind of what I'm leaning towards right now. So I'm going to put this thing back together with some more junkyard parts. I'm not going forged, but they are an upgrade, and we'll go through that. Okay, so when I put this thing together, if you remember, this motor's out of an 05 Chrysler 300. And there's kind of, in the 5.7s, there's like two different Hemis. There's the 03 to 08, which is what this is. It's the early Hemi. And then in 09, they made a lot of improvements. And that's what this is. So this is an Eagle Hemi. It's out of a 2011 Ram. So the Eagles, much, much better heads. The intake ports are huge. Well, I'll compare the heads later. So the heads flow a lot better. The intake flows a lot better. And the pistons, it seems to be the general consensus is these pistons are a little bit stronger than the early pistons. But this thing has variable valve timing and a whole bunch of other stuff that I really don't want to use, and I don't have a timing set. So what I'm going to do is basically build a non-variable valve timing Eagle Hemi. I'm going to take the heads off this thing, the pistons, rods, and put them into this block. As long as these cylinders are okay, I'm just going to swap that rotating assembly minus the crank into here. And then I'll use the better heads and everything. So this thing will be a big upgrade in flow on the top end, which, you know, it's a benefit, but the better pistons, supposedly, should help. But first thing I'm going to do is tear this thing down and see what I got. This was pulled out because it had some lifter noise. So these things are known for kind of having bad lifters. This thing has 204,000 miles on it. So, you know, it's a well-worn, well-used motor. I got it really cheap. So tear it down, see what we got, and then go through that. And hopefully then it'll just be yank this motor out and put these parts in that one, soften the tune-up, and hopefully we'll be pretty good. Okay, so I got the heads pulled off this thing. And the guy said he pulled it because he said it seemed a little down on power. It had some valve train noise, maybe a lifter tick, and he said it had a number 3 misfire, which, if we pull out this lifter, yeah, that thing is toasted. Look at it. It has actually worn down the end of the lifter. It's seized. It won't rotate at all. So then if we grab the other one out of number 3, look, that one rolls nice and easy. Come on, focus on it. There it is, a little bit. So you can see the roller actually sticks past the end of the lifter like it's supposed to. This one, kind of, but you can see where it was worn down. So definitely a bad lifter is what killed this thing. Otherwise, the pistons look pretty good. I mean, they're dirty. It's got 200,000 miles on it. Cylinders look pretty good. I think that was just the problem. So over here, so this is one of the Eagle heads I just took off. And this is the damaged head off the motor, off the pre-Eagle. So if you look here, these chambers are quite a bit smaller than these. These actually bump out quite a bit. So this one has a much smaller chamber. It flows a little better, or it flows a lot better actually through. I think these valves are actually a little bit bigger than the pre-Eagle ones. So if you just slap this head on a pre-Eagle motor, you'll actually end up with like 11-to-1 compression. So swapping the pistons over is a really good thing. And then if we look at the exhaust ports here, see this thing has kind of a small square port, and the Eagle head has a much bigger D port. I'll be able to use these manifolds. I'm just probably going to have to go in and port them and open them up so they match. But the big change here is the intake ports. So look at the size of these intake ports. Like, you know, there's 2 fingers. There's 2 fingers. It takes up that whole thing. This way, that's about 2 fingers. This way, it's about 2. So they're much, much wider. So these heads flow a ton more than these pre-Eagle ones. So these heads will be a huge upgrade. Both heads look like they're in really good shape. All right, so this is one of the old early Hemi pistons that came out of that motor that I used for mock-up, but it's the same thing that's in the truck right now. This is one of the Eagle pistons that I just pulled out. It's number 1. And for some of the differences, you can see the skirting significantly different. This one's a lot wider. And then on these, it's really hard to tell, but if I come down here, you can see this one has less of a dome to it. So that's how they drop the compression ratio with the smaller chambers, is there's quite a bit less dome. You can see it in the height there, which, whatever. I mean, I need that. I don't want the super high compression. But looking down the side here, if I can get them to line up, what you can see is that top ringland on the Eagle piston on the right is lower than the pre-Eagle on the left. Which means this little ledge right here that I busted, this top ring, is thicker on this one. So this should be a stronger piston just because there's more metal up there because they moved the top ring down. So this should be quite a bit stronger piston in comparison to this one, just because there's a lot more metal there. So we will see, but this is number 1. I mean, this thing has 200,000 miles. She's kind of nasty. Definitely going to have to clean these up. But other than that, they look good shape. And then even the bearings, I mean, they're dirty, but they look good, so I'll pull the rest of these out. Well, engine's out, it's on the stand, and you know, 1 and 3 are broke. And then over here, I broke number 8 up top. It's kind of hard to see. And number 2, not hard to see at all. So, hey, 50-50 on busted pistons. Man, I guess I'm a little harder on stuff than I want to admit sometimes. Also, split this motor mount right apart. So I'm going to have to like clamp that back together and weld it. Man, I didn't think I beat on stuff that hard, but seems like I do. But got to flip the pan over and see what she looks like in the pan. Hopefully clean. All the cylinders so far look clean. Won't really be able to tell until the pistons are out. But right now, I think I got away with just breaking pistons, and I think the block is going to be okay. Alright, I got all the pistons out of this thing, I got the pan pulled off. There's a little bit of metal in the bottom of the pan. Not bad, but all the rod bearings looked phenomenal. Like, I could probably reuse those rod bearings. The crank journals all look good. All the cylinders look good. I think I got away with one this time. 4 busted pistons and the block crank, everything's good. Doesn't seem like it sent metal through the motor, so I got to clean up those new pistons because they're a little carboned up, and then gap the rings and put them in here, and we can start assembling this thing. She's looking good. So I got all the Eagle pistons in with the Eagle rods, got them all cleaned up, gapped them to 25 thousandths on the rings, because I talked to some Hemi guys and that seems to be what they're running for ring gap. So yeah, no more busted pistons. She's going back together. The next thing I want to do, I want to check the timing. Just in case, like when I put the timing chain on, maybe I got it off a tooth or something. You know, just since this thing blew up and I don't really have an exact reason why, I want to open that up and check. Well, I pulled the timing cover and there's my timing dot lined up with the chain. And then down here, there's the 2 lighter ones right over the dot. So timing's perfect. I didn't screw anything up there. I thought maybe I was a half a link off or something and that was messing with it, but timing's perfect, so put it back together and keep going. This damn project is going to be the death of me. So I took the timing cover off and I checked all that, and then I put it back together and I was getting ready to put the heads on, and then I happened to notice that the oil pump was sitting on the floor. Oh, okay, no big deal, I just gotta take it all back apart. So I went to take the crank pulley off, and when I went to take the crank pulley off, the crank bolt was seized. So I ended up snapping the crank bolt off, and then I tried welding a nut to it. That didn't work. I ended up having to drill this thing out. But this isn't even all of it. This is a lot of it. There's still like an inch of bolt in there. So yeah, that's fun. But I think I got enough out of it. What I'm going to do is just go to a shorter bolt and just drill the end of the crank and put a shorter bolt in. But this thing would probably be back together if I didn't have to get all of this garbage out to try to, I mean, I heated it up, probably not good for the crank. I drilled it, I welded, there's a whole bunch of busted nuts over here that I welded, all because I forgot to put that stupid oil pump back in. And then somehow this bolt must have galled up in there when I put it back in. It's dumb. But I got it out good enough. Put it back together, I'll tap that to a bigger bolt and we'll call it good. Alright, I got the heads cleaned up and I got studs back in and gasket. So I'm not running the Cometics this time. This is a Felpro like stock style MLS gasket. So see, it's still a multi-layer steel. It's got this blue coating that's supposed to help it seal on like an imperfect surface. I didn't have any problems with the Cometics. I purely swapped these because these are like 25 bucks I think I paid, versus 100 for the Cometics. And since this thing seems to have piston problems and not head gasket problems, we're going to try this and we'll see how these hold up at low boost levels. From everybody I talked to, they should be good, so we'll save some money here. And for those of you that saw my fiasco before, this is the left side, this is the right side up, all the holes line up, this is right. Not putting it in backwards, but drop the head on, torque it down, and then I go do the other side. It's looking like a motor again. So I got these Eagle heads. I had to drill out the center 2 cylinders again for the manifold bolts. So I drilled out both sides, drilled and tapped them so I could flip the headers forward. So that's all done. The bottom end's all back together, the pan's on. I got the valve train on, so I had to use the newer Eagle rocker assemblies because they're different, and the Eagle push rods because they're longer because the valve train's lifted up. So those are on. I got fresh plugs in it. So now I got to put, I guess just put the valve covers on and the coil packs, and that'll kind of button the motor up. And then time to shove it back in. Oh, we'll have to put a clutch on it before we do it, but then we can shove it back in. But we'll button this thing up. It's looking damn good. It's an engine. It's officially an assembled engine. So now I just got to get it shoved back in here. And unfortunately, I don't have an intake for it yet. I need a new Eagle intake because these ports are gigantic compared to the pre-Eagle one. So they're not interchangeable. So got my eye on a couple intakes, but we're gonna get this thing shoved in here hopefully tomorrow. And man, this thing's getting close to being back on the road. I'm excited. It's good to see it being a full motor. Like, it is just sweet. This flywheel looks pretty good still. So does the clutch. I mean, it's got some wear, but it looks pretty darn healthy. I mean, it looks a hell of a lot better than the Spec clutch that's in the dually, in the 51, but to be fair, this truck has not seen any fourth gear two-step clutch launches yet. So I got the engine about ready to go in, or I had it in actually, and just couldn't get it to line up quite right on the trans. Messing with it, bound up, and that is a bare input shaft that you should not be able to see because there is the bearing retainer that I broke off. Must have bound up in the throwout bearing. So that sucks. I'm gonna have to get a new bearing retainer, and there's no way this thing is going back in right now. So that is awesome. Well, this is about the most unsatisfying end to this video that I think I could have had. You know, this truck has been a love-hate relationship lately. All hate, be honest. This thing, it's like time after time, it just kicks my butt. I mean, that stupid crank pulley issue, fighting through that, I lost a ton of time there, and now I broke that bearing retainer. I don't know. It's an NV4500, just like in the 51. That engine goes in and out like nothing. This one wanted to fight me. And it bound up, and I guess in trying to get everything lined up and moved around and jacking it up and shaking it, snapped that bearing retainer, which sucks big time. So this thing's going to sit until I can find one. I hope I can find one. I haven't even looked. I mean, they're different than the diesel ones, so they're probably pretty rare, which usually means expensive too, which kind of sucks. But yeah, this thing will be back together at some point. I don't know when, but I mean, the 51, I still haven't touched that thing. That's still in the trailer from the ruckus. Maybe blown up, maybe not. I don't know. But come back. We'll either be putting this engine in and it'll be done and running, or I'll be pushing this thing outside and I'll pull the 51 in and see what goes on there. Mostly depends on parts availability. I need the intake and the bearing retainer now. So, yeah, not a fun one.